Greetings and good day from down under. My name is Norma Reese. I am the chair of the Pinsky Favorite Poem Project for the Friends of Chautauqua Writers Center. My husband, Wally, and I live in Australia when we're not in Chautauqua. And today, because of the pandemic, we come to you from the warm coast of southern Queensland. Welcome to our second COVID-impacted attempt to conduct the Pinsky Favorite Poem Project. We thank each of our readers and all of our listeners for joining us under these different circumstances. However, this is our 13th consecutive annual Pinsky Favorite Project, so it's going to take more than a pandemic to make us lose heart. Perhaps because of the pandemic, poetry holds an even more important and special place in our life. To express the grief and location of our times, maybe only poetry will do. For, as I shared last season, Mary Oliver wrote, "Poems are not words at all, but fires for the cold, ropes let down to the lost, something as necessary as bread in the pockets of the hungry." Amanda Gorman, United States' first National Youth Poet Laureate, wowed us with her poem at President Biden's inauguration, and then went on to be the first poet ever to perform her poem honoring 3 people who served during the coronavirus at the Super Bowl. Whoever thought we would see poetry read or performed at a Super Bowl pregame show? Amanda Gorman's recitation must have made Robert Pinsky's heart sing. As poet laureate in 1997, Pinsky founded the Favorite Poem Project, in which thousands of Americans of varying backgrounds and ages and from every state now share their favorite poem. Pinsky believed that contrary to stereotype, poetry does have a strong presence in American culture. His project sought to give voice to that audience for poetry. Our friend and colleague, Georgia Court, introduced Pinsky's Favorite Poem Project to Chautauqua in 2008. And we thank her again as we start our 13th annual readings. Thank you for joining us. Our first reader is Fred Zerm. Fred has been coming to Chautauqua since 1998 and joined the board of what is now the Friends of Chautauqua Writers Center in 2009. Fred is a teacher, an award-winning director of community plays, and a published poet. He has been a longtime friend to the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center and to me, a wonderful supporter of my pet projects. Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome, Norma. Thank you for slipping in award-winning there.
I believe you are.
I'm going to read a poem that I value because it focuses on the tensions and the love that are usually involved in family. Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor and the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold, splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?
Thank you, Fred. May Korea, I knew I'd do that. Kuroiwa.
Can I just interrupt first? There's a few people who are not muted and we're getting some background noise. So could everyone please check that you're muted? Thanks.
Thanks, Bethan. May Kuroiwa has participated in our Chautauqua writing workshops and in 2020 was the winner of the Chautauqua Literary Arts Charles McCorkle Hauser Prize for Prose. Congratulations, May. May is originally from Hawaii, but has lived 2/3 of her life in the mid-Atlantic region. If she misses anything about Hawaii, it's the food, the mountains, the beaches, and the ready views of the Milky Way. She's going to read a poem by Tony Hoagland, and she has met him several times, shared a couple of meals and a dance floor. I'm jealous, May. He is an intelligent and generous poet with a sharp and wide open spirit and a great teacher. Thank you, May.
Yeah, Tony died about 3 years ago, and he's such a brave poet and so willing to take on what might be controversial issues. He's a narrative poet, and that is my background. As much as I truly admire poets that write in form and are capable of doing that well, I think he just tells some wonderful stories. And I'd like to read his poem, Beauty. When the medication she was taking caused tiny vessels in her face to break, leaving faint but permanent blue stitches in her cheeks, my sister said she knew she would never be beautiful again. After all those years of watching her reflection in the mirror, sucking in her stomach and standing straight, she said it was a relief being done with beauty. But I could see her pause inside that moment as the knowledge spread across her face with a fine distress, sucking the peach out of her lips, making her cute nose seem for the first time a little knobby. I'm probably the only one in the whole world who actually remembers the year in high school she perfected the art of being a dumb blonde, spending recess on the breezeway by the physics lab, tossing her hair and laughing that canary trill, which was her specialty, while some football player named Johnny, with a pained expression in his eyes, wrapped his thick finger over and over again in the bedspring of one of those pale curls. Or how she spent the next decade of her life auditioning a series of tall men, looking for just the one with the kind of attention span she could count on. Then one day, her time of prettiness was over, done, finito. And all those other beautiful women in the magazines and on the streets just kept on being beautiful everywhere you looked, walking in that kind of elegant, disinterested trance in which you sense they always seem to have one hand touching the secret place that keeps their beauty safe, inhaling and exhaling the perfume of it. It was spring, season when the young buttercups and daisies climb up on the mulched bodies of their forebears to wave their flags in the parade. My sister just stood still for 30 seconds, amazed by what was happening, then shrugged and tossed her shaggy head as if she was throwing something out, something she had carried a long ways, but had no use for anymore, now that it had no use for her. That too was beautiful.
Thank you, May. That too was beautiful. Thank you. Our next reader is Sony Tonami. In his second year as director of the literary arts at Chautauqua. Prior to his time at Chautauqua, Sony led a group of interns and coordinated poetry outreach in the Kent, Ohio community. That outreach work brought him to Chautauqua in 2018, where for 2 summers he managed the Wicks Traveling Stanza exhibit, now in the Holquist Center Poetry Makerspace. Sony has been a wonderful asset as we welcome and encourage younger people to enjoy the written word. Sony said he enjoys reading other people's works because, unlike his own poems, they never fail to surprise him. Thank you, Sony.
Thank you, Norma. What a generous introduction. Thank you, everyone. I am going to read a poem by Natasha Trethewey from her collection Native Guards that won the Pulitzer Prize. And I don't know if you read her memoir, Memorial Drive, and this collection was kind of a prelude to that. And the title of the poem is What the Body Can Say. Even in stone, the gesture is unmistakable. The man upright, though on his knees, spine ache, head flung back, and covering his eyes, his fingers spread across his face. I think grief. And since he's here in the courtyard of the Divinity School, what he might ask of God. How easy it is to read this body's language, or those gestures we've come to know, the wisdom that is both a symbol of agreement and the request for a ride. The 2 fingers held up that once meant victory, then peace. But what was my mother saying that day not long before her death? Her face tilted up at me, her mouth falling open, wordless, just as we open our mouths in church to take in the wafer, meaning communion. What matters is context, the side of the word, or that my mother wanted something I still can't name. What kneeling, my face behind my hands, I might ask of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Sony. Beautiful. Our next reader was to be Sarah Vest. We're very lucky to have Sarah working with us as a literary arts reporter for the Chautauquan Daily. Unfortunately, we had a clash of metaphors or some important literary arts news that she was called away and is unable to join us today. So I'm going to pretend to be Sarah. She is a recent St. Joseph's University graduate. She now holds a degree in English, as well as minors in biology and medieval, Renaissance, and Reformation studies. This is an eclectic mix, but she feels it perfectly sums up her personality and demonstrates her love of accumulating knowledge. While at St. Joe's, she was a Division I coxswain for the women's rowing program, where she rounded out her senior year with a bronze Dad Vail medal and a bronze NCAA Atlantic 10 Conference Championship medal. In her free time, she likes to read fiction of all genres, but prefers science fiction and fantasy. Sarah was going to read Personal by Tony Hoagland because of the social and political implications she feels it holds at this time. Personal by Tony Hoagland. Don't take it personally, they say, but I did. I took it all quite personal. The breeze, the river, the colors of the field, the price of grapefruit and stamps, the wet hair of women in the rain. And I cursed what hurt me. And I praised what gave me joy, the most simple-minded of possible responses. The government reminded me of my father with its deafness and its laws. And the weather reminded me of my mother with her tropical squalls. Enjoy it while you can, they said of happiness. Think first, they said of talk. Get over it, they said at the School of Broken Hearts. But I couldn't, and I didn't, and I don't believe in the clean break. I believe in the compound fracture served with a source of deep regret. I believe in saying it all and taking it all back and saying it again for good measure while the air fills up with I'm sorries, like wheeling birds and the trees look seasick in the wind. Oh, life, can you blame me for making a scene? You were that yellow caboose, the moon disappearing over the ridge of cloud. I was the dog chained in some fool's backyard, barking and barking, trying to convince everyone else to take it personal too. Thank you, Sarah. Our next reader is Mark Altshuler. Mark runs the Chautauqua Softball League and has a deep passion for all things baseball. Mark, too, is a longtime friend of the literary arts, and he leads a very popular Saturday morning short story discussion group every Saturday morning during the season. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Norma. Some poems require a little historical background. This one does, because it's about a historical event that you may not know. Paul Robeson was born in 1898, was totally committed to social justice. But that's not the way the US government saw him. They saw him as a troublemaker and they branded him a communist, which he was never a member of the Communist Party. After 1949, this man, who might be the most talented man our country ever produced, lived essentially under house arrest. He was stripped of his passport, and it was hard for him to make a living. By the way, what I would recommend after this session, go onto YouTube, find a recording of that great bass baritone of Paul Robeson. I think his real crime, I'm putting crime in quotes, was that he was a Black man who insisted on being treated with the fullness of his humanity. That was not allowed. So the event that this poem is referring to took place in May of 1952. Robeson was invited to sing at the International Peace Conference in Canada. Without a passport, without Zoom technology, what he did is he stood in the northernmost point in the state of Washington and sang to about 40,000 people in both Canada and the United States. So that's what the event is in this poem. Cross That Line by Naomi Shihab Nye. Paul Robeson stood on the northern border of the USA and sang into Canada, where a vast audience sat on folding chairs waiting to hear him. He sang into Canada. His voice left the USA when his body was not allowed to cross that line. Remind us again, dear friend. I'm sorry, let me do it again. Remind us again, brave friend, what countries may we sing into? What line should we all be crossing? What songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days?
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the background and very good reading. Thank you. Our next reader is Robin Lewis, a gentle person, a good friend with many talents. She's a retired lawyer, an exhibited artist, and now a teacher of English as a second language. teaching while she works on her master's in that field. Meanwhile, she is fluent in Russian and I believe recently a published poet. Robin is also a marvelous friend to the literary arts, working often behind the scenes to help make things happen. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Norma. I spent part of this pandemic going through old New Yorkers, which unfortunately seemed to accumulate a lot faster than I could read them. And I went to check the poetry, put aside those with articles I might want to read. And in the process of that, I came across this poem, which caught me. And I liked it so much, I cut it out and I have gone back to it from time to time. I think because it catches these rare moments of transcendence and joy that you suddenly experience when life is at its darkest and before life resumes. It's called A Baker Swept By excuse me, by Eward Hirsch. You were already losing your eyesight last winter in Rome when you paused in the doorway at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning and a baker swept by on a shiny bicycle, waving a cap and singing under his breath. You didn't know bakers wore white aprons dusted with flour and floated around the city like angels on a freshly baked day. You weren't sure why morning halted up and down the street as you stood in the doorway and a baker winged by on a weekend morning so new and pristine that you looked into the sky and for one undiminished instant of misplaced time, you saw brightness everywhere before a shadow crossed the rooftops and it was blotted out.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks. Our next reader is Wally Reese. He is, of course, my husband, or not of course, but he is my husband, and cohabitating down under with me at the moment, unable to be so close to you guys, but we're hoping next year we can fix that. Wally is a second generation Sun Devil from Arizona State University, where he graduated as an English major. He then went off to things unrelated, and in his retirement discovered Chautauqua. And we've been seasonal attendees since 2009. Wally has participated in many literary art workshops, more poetry than prose, and he's currently enjoying reading some of the classic Russian writers of the 19th century. Thank you, Wally.
Go Devils. Yes, I'm reading a poem. I'm a Ted Kooser fan, and the poem I'm reading is, I think, is just an excellent example of his style. He writes poetry we can understand, conversational poems, and he's a master of single metaphor poems, which I've heard him criticized because his poetry is basically a single metaphor style, a lot of it, and people like more subtle metaphors. Well, I think that's an asset. I really like to be able to understand poetry, and I appreciate that. He also uses images which sometimes remind me of William Carlos Williams, that imagery type, and he writes always, there's an element of humor. He writes to entertain, you might say. All poets probably write to entertain, but not always with humor. They entertain in different ways. And anyway, sometimes his humor is light, sometimes darker humor, but there's always a little bit of humor there, maybe sort of in the mode of Billy Collins or Fred Zerm. Anyway, this poem, The Early Bird, is a favorite. The early bird, still dark and raining hard on a cold May morning, and yet the early bird is out there chirping its sweet, sour, wooden pulley notes, pleased, it would seem, to be given work, hauling the heavy bucket of dawn up from the darkness, note over note, and letting us drink. Thank you.
Thank you, Wally. What a wonderful week that we had with Ted Kooser a couple of times when he was on the grounds. Brings back fond memories. Lara Lillybridge is our next reader. Lara says she sings offbeat and dances off key. She's a proud mother of 2 boys, 2 cats, and 2 memoirs. 1 girlish, growing up in a lesbian home, and 2 mama, mama, only mama, an irreverent guide for the newly single parent. She started her writing journey in the Chautauqua Writers' Workshops while her parents watched her baby and toddler, who are both now teenagers. Lara says she really wishes she could write poetry. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you. This is one of my all-time favorite poems about mothering. I think that I didn't really understand the terrible fear or how terrible fear could be until I was a mother, but also such joy and such hope, and looking at my kids, such hope for the next generation. So this is Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I've kept this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. Excuse me. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you. And I'm saving the final reading for myself today. I wanted to share a poem by our famous Fred Zurn in a recently published book called Object Lessons. I didn't ask Fred's permission to do this, so I hope I can do him justice. I chose this poem because in such minimum words, it tells us the traumatic passage of poetry in recent times and ends on such a positive note that I couldn't resist. At the Local Barnes & Noble by Fred Zurn. 1. Poetry used to be between polka and science fiction, between disguising what is and describing what is not, while betting on what soon could be. 2. Where else would Ogden Nash sit so close to Sylvia Plath? 3. They've moved poetry again. That involuntary nomad is never where it once was, no longer near self-help or occult arts. It's now the other side of toys and games, right beside activity books, where the works face the windows and the windows face the world. Thank you. And that concludes our poetry reading this year. Numbers are a little low because of COVID and our difficulty in communicating, but we really thank you all for having joined us. And we've really enjoyed your reading, and I think we've done Robert Pinsky proud. And I'm going to turn back to Fred, and he's going to lead us out of here. Thank you, Fred.
Ah, shucks, Norma. Thank you very much. I did want to just stress that in chat, I put links to these poems that were read. And I hope those links lead you to buy full books by these poets. I know May put something about Tony Hoagland's book. I do hope you, if you are a writer of poetry and you've been to Chautauqua this season or signed up for a course, that you enter the writing contest. The deadline is Sunday the 25th, and that you look out for our other sponsored events. Tomorrow at 12:15, we'll have Authors Hour with Clara Silverstein and Debbie Mader. Later in the season, Lara Lillibridge will be part of that program. And we also have open mic on Sunday night. If you want to either listen to some writing by fellow Chautauquans, and I consider you all Chautauquans, or you have something you'd like to share. So anyway, please consider joining the Friends, and please join us again next year for the Favorite Poem Project. With that, I'll say good early evening, or I guess to Norma, good early morning.
Morning.
Right? Good early morning.
Morning all.
Thank you so much for getting up early for poetry. Take
My
care.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Norma.
Thank you, Norma.
Yeah.
Great to see so many familiar faces.